Hello, my friend. From whenever or wherever you may be, I'm glad that you're sharing this moment with me. That rhymed and I didn't intend for it to. If this is your first time sharing space with me, I am CeCe of Stitch Witchcraft, and these are letters. I think of this knitting vlog as a space to write a letter to a friend, to share the little moments and thoughts that happen as you work through a knitting project, and just a way to build space and connection with all of you. This year started difficult, if I have to say. I don't know about you, but I feel like I start every new year disoriented. Like waking up from a sleep that maybe wasn't as restful as I had hoped. And suddenly you look around and realize that there's so much that you could do to make life a little more joyful. So I decided that's what I would do. I would tend to my garden, as my grandma always says. Look at my space and care for the things that I have. Notice the things that bring me stress and take care of the little mistakes that slip in from time to time. For me, and thinking about knitting, this came with the realization that I have an odd relationship with my stash. Yarn brings me so much joy. All of the brilliant designers and dyers, the mills, the brilliant, dedicated hands that go into the process of making yarn before it even touches my hands. And over my first year of knitting, I built up quite a stash. But I had a moment, you may know if you follow me on Instagram, where I realized that my stash caused me a bit of anxiety. And so I decided to find out why that was. And I realized that part of it was I couldn't even tell you what I had. So I decided to start the new year purposefully. Organizing, creating intentional space where everything had a place and I could truly honor and know what it was that I held. I could see the things that inspired me and hopefully reduce the anxiety that came with having a yarn stash, because that seemed counterintuitive. How could something that brings me so much joy also make me stressed? So I started by getting things in order, by finding a place for everything, and by reminding myself of what it is that I had and why it is that I love it. New Tiden, how could that not bring joy? Or my chance to work with Unspun for the very first time came at the end of last year. But I realized that my system for storing yarn before tucked it all away in the back of my closet, and so moments would come where I would see beautiful yarn online and think, oh, I miss that, I need that. If I don't get it now, I'll never have a chance, or just this sense that every chance to buy yarn was the last, and that I didn't have anything, even though I knew that wasn't true. So I built this space where I could see what it is, what I had, where I could be reminded of the beautiful things that I had already made, and also get a better sense of the things that I might be able to make with what I had right in front of me. Yarn stashes are a very personal thing, but I realized that the way that was most helpful for me to think of it was the same way I was taught to think of a pantry. To keep things well stocked, well organized, to know what you have and to know what purpose it served. And suddenly I didn't feel so much stress about my stash anymore. So I decided to keep going, to organize. And for me, that meant my needles as well. I spent so long trying to find what felt like the perfect needle binder for me, and happened to stumble upon Thread and Maple's new binder that they created. I have a weakness for things that are handmade, I think as many as you do, but the thing that really got me was just the thoughtful design behind this. So I placed my pre-order, and it arrived far sooner than I expected. And oh, my friend, is it beautiful. A delight to touch, intentionally designed. And the stress that I was feeling about knitting, the sense of all the pieces being all over the place, of not knowing what I had or the best way to keep it together, suddenly felt like it was falling away and leaving me a little more space for just the joy of enjoying the craft itself. And if I could confess, this is absolutely the part that convinced me to give this chance. The idea that I could take a page of the binder with me as I travel, whether to the woods or for work, I was sold. And before I know it, that organization feels like it pays off. As I, by chance, happened to see Sari Nordlund put a call out for test knits for her design, and I turned to my stash and realized I have exactly what I need right here, right in front of me, and I can make a plan. I often buy yarn with projects in mind, but I always give myself the flexibility of changing those plans when opportunities arise, and I was so excited. I entered my name and I was picked. So I started test knitting the Marzipan Pullover by Sari Nordlund, and it just felt like fate. The Marzipan Pullover is actually my first cabled sweater, and this was my first time using any of the Knitting for Olive yarns. For this one, I used their heavy Merino, and I can't tell you how much I appreciate swatching for so many reasons. Though, let me confess that the first time I made a sweater, I didn't swatch. I learned that lesson quickly. Working and doing swatches always gives me a sense of comfort because it gives me time to get comfortable with both the yarn and the pattern before I cast on. So by the time that I actually worked the cables in the sweater, my hands knew what they were doing. Those moments of, oh, I know what comes next, without having to worry. Now, I'll confess that swatching in the round does bring me a little bit of sadness when I have to cut the yarn, because one of my favorite parts about knitting is the fact that things are never permanent. You can always frog back. You can always start over. But swatching in the round and speaking put an end to that. I comfort myself in knowing that I'm being as accurate as I can be, and also I'm making tentative plans. I think I might want to make something out of my swatches sometime, whether that's a swatch hat or just a piece of art. Just because I'm not using them now doesn't mean I won't find use for them later. And heading into a project with the level of confidence that things will fit and I know how a pattern works, well, for me, that's priceless. The opportunity to spend a little time working with the yarn before I cast on also raised some questions for me. I realized as I was knitting with the double or the heavy merino that the yarn felt confusing in my hands. I couldn't quite make sense of what it was, and so I looked on their website and tried to make sense of their information, but I struggled. They have wonderful efforts that they've put into sustainability and ethics, but it didn't answer the question that was running in the back of my mind, which was, superwash or not? So I asked, and they wonderfully answered. I didn't realize, looking at their certification, that their merinos were non-superwash, and suddenly things made much more sense. As the yarn worked through my hands, I could help make sense of what it was that I was experiencing. And I love non-superwash, both from an ethical and environmental standpoint, and just a general appreciation for things as natural as they can be. But even thinking about that, I couldn't help but reflect on my experiences working with this yarn and how different it felt. And that's probably because the last couple of projects that I've worked on have been non-superwash as well, but they've been Plotilopi and Nutina, which are very different feelings. But one thing was for certain, the opportunity to work with this yarn felt like it flew by, and before I knew it, I was almost done with the first skein. And at this point, the patterns and the cables just feel intuitive. It's like for you when you sit down and knit. If you have particular rituals or habits, but mine are almost always spent in your company. I listen to other podcasts or audiobooks, and recently I've been finding a lot of joy in feeling that sense of connection. My pets make sure that I'm never alone when I knit, but the opportunity to listen to people talk about something that I share a passion on, to commiserate over mistakes, or just to share the excitement of a work in progress always brings me a lot of joy. And that connection means a lot. I live in an area where it's hours to my local yarn shop, and my friends are truly patient with my passions, but they don't quite share the excitement. Knitting for me is a daily practice, even if it's only 5 minutes a day. I just love to start my day in this way, if I can. To have an opportunity to sit quietly with myself and to prioritize that as important, as something that has meant so much to my well-being and growth. It never ceases to amaze me, the idea that prioritizing yourself and your well-being is a radical act. It's a wild idea. I want to put myself first, I say, and the world stares in horrified fascination. Isn't that selfish? No, it's survival. Audre Lorde had it right when she talked about self-care as a way of self-preservation. It's more than bubble baths or removing small inconveniences, though those do bring me joy. It's prioritizing the things that make you feel whole, filling your cup first. And we always have people in our lives to care for, but I hope that you never forget that you're one of those people too. Taking the space to organize my stash and think purposefully about what it meant for me. Having the ability to work on something that felt beautiful to wrap my life in art. It's more than a hobby. It's something deeper. I don't know what to call it. All I know is that knitting is a way for me to choose myself. Maybe it's the same for you too. Another day, another row, and another, and another, and I will admit I have a hard time putting this project down. I was nervous knitting my first cable sweater that I would struggle, but this pattern is beautiful. I find the cables intriguing, and watching them flow together is so truly satisfying. It's one of those projects that, as you're knitting it, you realize just how much skill it takes to design something that flows together so effortlessly. As we know, something that looks so easy often isn't really that easy at all, and sometimes life gets in the way. Despite that, I make progress, and it feels like the Marzipan Pullover is coming together like magic right before my eyes. It's meant to have a folded collar that I'm supposed to fold down later, but as I look at the project come together, I can't help but wondering, will I actually do it? Because seeing it the way it is now, it's so hard to think of changing. I know that I'll make the final call after I've had a chance to block it and to see how things fall together, but it's one of those pieces that I can't help but be proud of. It's not even done yet, but I'm coming to the realization that things don't need to be finished to be worthy of being shared, and it's not just about the product, it's the process. Still, I try to imagine what the product will look like once I finish, and if I follow the pattern to change my cuff, but for now, I'm leaning into the fact that I've made this. After only a year and a few months of knitting, after just the progress of time, all it takes is time. I recently joked on Instagram that I live my life like a cartoon character. I have one outfit, and lately it's been overalls and a sweater. So as I decide, is this the right length? Will I end here? It only makes sense to me to try it on in that unofficial uniform. Why? Because I'm moving forward purposefully. Imperfectly, but purposefully. Until next time.